Do you remember walking into your grandmother's house and knowing before you even crossed the threshold that something was right? Not just the smell, though the smell was real. Something deeper, something settled, like the house itself had been figured out by a woman who had no room for waste and no patience for foolishness. She had tricks, Lord, she had tricks. And today we are going to remember every last one of them together. I'm Mama Lou, and if you've been with me a while, you already know what we do here. We sit down slow. We go back. We honor the women who fed us, housed us, and stretched what little they had into something that felt like plenty. These 25 tricks, these household secrets, were not in any magazine. They were not on any TV program. They lived in the hands and the minds of Black grandmothers across this country, passed down in kitchens that smelled like lard and lemon, in back rooms where the windows were covered with newspaper in the winter to keep the cold out. They worked then, and honey, most of them still work right now. Let's go back. Let's start at the beginning. Trick number one, the heel of the bread. You remember this? Nobody threw away the heel of the bread. Nobody. In a house where a loaf of white bread cost 19 cents and it had to last the better part of the week, that heel was not garbage. Grandmother would save every heel, both ends in a brown paper bag on top of the refrigerator. By the end of the week, she had enough to make bread pudding, to top a casserole, to stretch a meatloaf, or to crumble into a pot of greens for body. That heel was not the throwaway piece. That heel was the insurance policy. And if you were the child who tried to skip past it and grab from the middle of the loaf, she would look at you in a way that required no words whatsoever. Trick number two, coffee grounds in the icebox. Before baking soda became the answer to everything, grandmother was using dried coffee grounds to absorb odors in the icebox, and later the refrigerator. She would dry them out on a piece of foil, put them in a small dish, set them on the middle shelf, and that refrigerator would smell clean. Not perfumed, clean. The way clean is supposed to smell, like nothing at all. She was not reading a home tip column. She had figured this out herself because she had to. And it worked just as well as anything that came in a yellow box. Trick number three, newspapers on the windows. In January, in a house without insulation worth speaking of, cold air came in around the window glass like it had been personally invited. Grandmother knew this. She would take the weekly newspaper, the one that had already been read twice, and she would line the window sills. She would tuck folded sheets of newspaper between the window frame and the glass. That dead air space in the paper trapped warmth the same way a wall cavity does. The house stayed warmer, the heating bill or the wood pile lasted longer. She did not know the science. She knew the result, and the result was her children went to school warm. Trick number four, salt on a cast iron skillet. Now, if you grew up in a Black household of any generation, you know cast iron, and you know that cast iron does not go in the dishwasher. It does not get scrubbed with steel wool. It does not touch dish soap if grandmother has anything to say about it. When food stuck to the pan, she poured coarse salt directly into it, still warm, mind you, and she scrubbed with a folded piece of brown paper bag or a dry rag. The salt lifted every bit of stuck food without stripping the seasoning she had built up over 20 years of Sunday morning biscuits. That skillet was an heirloom before anyone called skillets heirlooms. It was her most reliable tool. And the trick to keeping it was salt, heat, and a light coat of lard before you put it away. Every time without fail. Trick number five, vinegar on the wood floors. Grandmother did not buy floor cleaner. She made it. A capful of white vinegar in a bucket of warm water. That was it. She would wring that mop out until it was barely damp, because too much water on wood floors warps them, and she knew that, and she would mop those floors until they shone. The vinegar cut grease. It neutralized odors. It left no residue. And those floors, those wide plank pine floors that had been walked on by 3 generations, they looked like someone had poured honey over them and then wiped it clean, gleaming. That was a 15-cent trick on a floor that a refinisher would charge you $300 to touch today. Trick number six, baking soda for bee stings and bug bites. Summer meant outside, and outside meant bites. Mosquitoes that seemed to wait for you personally. Wasps that had no business being anywhere near the back porch but were there anyway. Grandmother did not rush to the drugstore. She made a paste, baking soda, and just enough water to hold it together, and she pressed it on the sting. She held it there with a steady hand, and she talked to you about something else entirely, because the real trick was the calm. The paste drew out the venom and the itch. The calm told your nervous system it was not the end of the world. Both things were medicine. She knew that too. Trick number 7, the mason jar in the back of the pantry. Every grandmother I ever knew had a mason jar, sometimes several, filled with something she was saving. Bacon grease, ham drippings, the rendered fat from a pork shoulder that had cooked low and slow all Saturday afternoon. That jar sat on the back of the stove or in the cool of the pantry, and it was the flavor base for everything. Greens started in it, cornbread batter got a spoonful folded in, cast iron was seasoned with it, beans were enriched with it. She was not wasting fat. She was banking flavor. Every spoonful of that jar was a deposit she was about to spend on something that would make a grown person close their eyes and go quiet for a moment. Trick number 8, wrapping meat in brown paper. When grandmother came back from the market, and the market in many southern towns and northern city neighborhoods alike meant a butcher counter where a pig's head might be tagged 49 cents a pound, she did not put her meat straight into the refrigerator in the store packaging. She unwrapped it, she patted it dry, she seasoned it if it was going to sit overnight, and she wrapped it fresh in brown paper. Brown paper breathes. It keeps the meat from sitting in its own moisture and going bad before its time. It was a butcher's trick, and she had learned it, and she used it every single week without once thinking of it as anything special. It was just how you did things when you could not afford to throw anything away. Trick number 9, cornstarch on the collar. Before spray starch came in a can, there was cornstarch dissolved in water, applied to a collar or a cuff with a damp cloth, and pressed with an iron that had been set on the back of the stove to heat up. Sunday clothes were serious business. You did not go to church in a wrinkled collar. You did not stand in front of the Lord or the congregation looking like you had just rolled out of bed. Grandmother starched those shirts until the collar stood up on its own conviction. That cornstarch mixture, a tablespoon in a cup of water, made a collar stiff enough to last all the way through the sermon, the fellowship, and half the ride home. And it cost her nothing because cornstarch was already in the kitchen where it belonged. Trick number 10, the pot of water on the radiator. If you grew up in a northern city in a building with steam heat, you remember the radiator, that clanking, hissing, reliable iron beast in the corner of the room. You also remember how dry the air got in winter. Dry enough to crack your lips by morning. Dry enough to make your skin feel like paper. Grandmother put a pot of water on top of that radiator. Sometimes she added a few cloves or a piece of orange peel or a cinnamon stick from the small jar she kept in the back of the spice cabinet. The water evaporated slowly all night long. The air stayed moist enough to breathe. The room smelled like something warm and good. A humidifier today runs you $40 or $50. Grandmother's version cost her whatever was already in the kitchen, and her version smelled considerably better. Trick number 11, lemon on cutting boards. A wooden cutting board, used hard and washed often, starts to carry smell. Onion, fish, garlic that seems to have no intention of ever truly leaving. Grandmother cut a lemon in half and she scrubbed that board hard, using the cut face of the lemon, pressing the juice deep into the wood grain. Then she would sprinkle coarse salt over it and scrub again with the same lemon half. Then she let it sit in the sun on the back step for an hour if the weather allowed. That board came back smelling like nothing, which is exactly what a clean surface should smell like. The citric acid killed bacteria. The salt abraded the surface clean. The sun did what the sun has always done. She knew this. She had always known this. Trick number 12, petroleum jelly on the door hinges. A squeaky door hinge is a small thing, but in a house with sleeping children or a sleeping husband who got up early for the 6 a.m. shift, it was not small at all. Grandmother kept a small tin of petroleum jelly in the kitchen drawer, alongside the rubber bands and the safety pins and the ball of twine that had been there since before anyone could remember. A thin coat on each hinge pin, worked in with a fingertip, and that door moved without a sound, not for a week. For months she did this quietly, without ceremony, as part of the maintenance of a house she took seriously as her domain. She was the superintendent of that home. She knew every noise it made, and she addressed each one. Trick number 13, hanging wet laundry inside in winter. when it was too cold to hang sheets on the line, and in a Chicago winter or a Detroit winter, too cold arrived in October and stayed until April. Grandmother hung the wet laundry inside, on lines strung across the kitchen, over the backs of chairs in the hallway, on the wooden drying rack near the radiator. This was not just about drying the clothes. The evaporating moisture from the wet sheets and towels put humidity back into the air. It was the radiator trick all over again, only bigger. The clothes dried slowly, the air softened, the house felt less like a box and more like a home, and the sheets dried indoors came out with a particular kind of clean smell, cool and faintly sweet, that no dryer sheet in this world has ever successfully copied. Trick number 14, old nylon stockings as vegetable bags. Nothing in that house got thrown away if it still had a use, and a pair of stockings with a run in them had uses left. Grandmother would cut them into sections or keep them whole, and she would use them to hang onions and garlic in the pantry or in a cool corner of the kitchen. You dropped an onion in, you tied a knot, you dropped another, you tied another knot. When you needed one, you cut below the bottom knot. The mesh allowed air to circulate completely around each onion and each head of garlic, which meant they lasted weeks longer than they would in a bowl or a bag. A 10-pound bag of onions bought once could last a full month stored this way. In a household feeding 6 people on $4 a day, that month mattered enormously. Trick number 15, bread in the cookie jar. You kept a slice of bread in the cookie jar or in the container with the brown sugar, or anywhere you were storing something that needed to stay soft. The bread released just enough moisture to keep the cookies from going hard, to keep the brown sugar from turning into one solid brick that required a hammer and some strong language to break apart. This is such a simple thing, a slice of bread, and yet it worked perfectly every single time, and it cost you nothing but the heel that was already saved. Do you see how these tricks connected to each other? Nothing was isolated. Everything was part of a system, a whole way of running a house that made every single resource go as far as it possibly could. Trick number 16, chalk in the silverware drawer. Moisture is the enemy of silver, and in a house that might have a good set of silverware, or even just the good forks kept for Sunday, tarnish was a constant battle. Grandmother put a few pieces of plain white chalk in the silverware drawer. Chalk absorbs moisture. It keeps the air in that small enclosed space dry enough that tarnish slows down considerably. She might also wrap individual pieces in small squares of flannel. The chalk and the flannel together could keep silver presentable for months between polishings. She was not storing silver in a bank vault. She was storing it in a drawer in a wood house, and she was doing it right. Trick number 17, ammonia to clean the oven. This one requires a word of caution because grandmother knew exactly what she was doing, and you need to as well. On a night when the oven needed a deep clean, she would set a small bowl of ammonia, plain household ammonia, inside the cold oven, close the door, and leave it overnight. In the morning, she would open every window in the kitchen, take the bowl out carefully, and wipe that oven down with a damp cloth. The ammonia fumes had loosened every bit of baked-on grease, every blackened drip, everything that had accumulated over weeks of biscuits and roasts and sweet potato pies. The oven wiped clean in minutes. She did not scrub for an hour. She did not buy a can of caustic foam. She used ammonia, patience, and the night hours. Same result, a fraction of the effort. Trick number 18, Epsom salt in the garden. Out back, or on the side of the house, or in whatever piece of ground she had claimed, and she always claimed some. Grandmother grew things, tomatoes, collard greens, hot peppers, herbs, and she fed that garden with Epsom salt dissolved in water, applied at the roots once a month through the growing season. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. Magnesium is what makes leaves green. It is what helps a plant take up the other nutrients already in the soil. Those tomatoes of hers were not lucky. Those collard leaves were not an accident. She was feeding the soil the way she fed her family, with intention, with knowledge, with consistency, and what came out of that garden went straight into the pot and onto the table. Trick number 19, sugar water for cut flowers. When someone brought flowers to the house for a birthday, for a homecoming, for no reason but beauty, grandmother put them in a vase with water and a teaspoon of sugar and a small splash of white vinegar. The sugar fed the cut stems, The vinegar inhibited the bacteria that clouded the water and shortened the bloom. Those flowers would stand for 10 days, sometimes 12, sometimes 2 full weeks in a house that did not have air conditioning and in summer was warm as a greenhouse. She had not read a floral preservation study. She had watched flowers long enough to understand what they needed. That was her laboratory. That was her data, trick number 20. The dryer and the ice cube. Now this one bridges the old world and the new. Because grandmother adapted when the dryer came into the house, and she brought her ingenuity with her. You have a shirt that is wrinkled from sitting in a suitcase or folded too long in the drawer. You do not want to set up the ironing board. You do not have the time or the energy. You put the shirt in the dryer with 2 ice cubes and you run it on high heat for 8 to 10 minutes. The ice cubes turn to steam. The steam relaxes the wrinkles. The shirt comes out ready to wear. This is grandmother thinking applied to a new machine. She didn't learn it from a video. She thought about how heat and moisture work together the same way she always had, and she figured it out. Trick number 21, toothpaste on the wall scuffs. A house with children is a house with scuffs, shoes against the baseboard, a chair pushed back too hard, a small fist that found the wall at running speed. Grandmother used white toothpaste, plain white, not the gel kind, on a damp cloth, rubbed gently on the scuff, and wiped it clean. The mild abrasive in the toothpaste buffed the mark away without taking the paint with it. She did not repaint the wall every time a child ran through the kitchen. She had a cloth and a tube of toothpaste and a few minutes, and the wall looked right again. This was her standard: maintain it, keep it right. Not because company was always coming, though company was always welcome, but because a kept house was a dignified life. Trick number 22, onion on a bee sting. Yes, there were 2 tricks for stings because summer was long and children were everywhere and bees had opinions beyond the baking soda paste. Grandmother also kept the knowledge that a cut raw onion pressed directly onto a bee sting draws out the venom and reduces swelling faster than leaving it alone. The sulfur compounds in the onion have genuine anti-inflammatory properties. She did not know the chemistry. She knew the onion. She knew that if you pressed it on and held it there and counted to 60 slowly out loud, because counting aloud made you breathe, the child would stop crying before the count was done. The onion helped, the counting helped, the voice helped. All 3 were the remedy. Trick number 23, saving potato water. When you boil potatoes, you pour out that cloudy, starchy water, and in doing so, you pour out something valuable. Grandmother saved it. She used the starchy potato water to thicken gravies and soups when she did not want to add more flour or cornstarch. She used it to feed her plants. The trace minerals in the cooking water are good for soil. In the summer, she would let it cool and use it in a spray bottle to stiffen shirt collars the way a light starch would. 1 pot of potatoes made 3 or 4 things happen. That was the arithmetic she ran in her head all day, every day, without writing any of it down, because it was not a recipe, it was a way of thinking. Trick number 24, the cold butter trick for pastry. Every baker in every tradition knows that fat needs to be cold when it goes into pastry dough, but grandmother's version of this was specific. She did not just take the butter from the refrigerator, she grated it. On the same box grater she used for cheese and for potatoes. Grated cold butter distributes into flour in tiny, even pieces. Those pieces create the layers that make a crust flake apart when you bite it. She worked fast. With cold hands, she would run them under cold water first, and she handled that dough as few times as possible, because every touch warms it, and warmth is the enemy of flake. Her pie crust was not accidental. It was engineered quietly by a woman who had made 400 pie crusts and learned from every single one of them. Trick number 25, the warm oven for rising bread. And the last one, the one that ties everything together, the way a good ending is supposed to do. Yeast needs warmth to rise, not heat, warmth. The difference between those 2 words is the difference between bread and a brick. Grandmother turned her oven on low, around 170 degrees for 2 minutes, then turned it off. She put her bowl of dough inside with a clean dish towel laid over the top, and she closed the oven door. In that residual warmth, slightly humid from the dough itself, the yeast did exactly what yeast is meant to do. Slowly, steadily, without interference, the dough doubled. sometimes more. She did not rush it. She did not check on it every 5 minutes. She put it in, she closed the door, and she went and did something else that needed doing, because there was always something else that needed doing. That is the real trick. When you think about it, not just the warm oven, not just the grated butter or the potato water or the chalk in the silverware drawer, the real trick was the mind behind all of it. A mind that looked at a small amount of something and saw more uses than one, that looked at a problem and found the solution already in the kitchen, already in the drawer, already in the garden out back. These women did not have much in the way of money, not in the Depression years, not in the years of segregation and low wages and doors that stayed closed, but they had knowledge, they had observation, they had a refusal to let anything go to waste, not food, not fabric, not water, not time, and that refusal was not poverty thinking. That refusal was wisdom. That refusal is what kept families whole, kept children fed, kept homes clean and warm and smelling like something you would walk toward rather than away from. We call these tricks because that is a word people understand. But what they really were, what they really are, is a legacy. A body of knowledge earned across generations by women who were never paid for the work they did, never credited in any magazine or textbook, never given a platform to stand on and say, I figured this out. I kept this family alive with these two hands and this one mind. Well, this is that platform, right here, this video, this moment, you and me sitting together remembering. This is us saying we know where it came from. We know who worked it out. We know the name of the woman who kept the bacon grease in the mason jar and the chalk in the silverware drawer and the bread in the cookie tin and the dough in the warm oven. We know her, we loved her, and we do not intend to forget. If something in this video came back to you, a smell, a sound, a face, a kitchen you haven't thought about in years, leave it in the comments below. Tell me what grandmother did that I didn't cover here, because I know there is more, there is always more, and we have time. We are in no hurry. I'm Mama Lou. Thank you for sitting with me today. I'll see you next time.